Hello and welcome to our newest edition of the Low Code Cafe. This is episode number 120 for Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. Today we're going to be talking about extending the platform in the area of connectors. And so this is a pro code topic, but I think it's going to be a very interesting one. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plantin-App, and we are glad you're here. This is an event we do every Wednesday this hour to update our community, provide some demonstrations, but the biggest part of the hour is spent on hands-on codings, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. We would welcome you as a guest speaker if you have an application or a technique that would be of value to other Plantin-App low coders. We would be happy to host you on that. So reach out to us and let us know. We have a couple of those scheduled in the next few weeks. Well, let's say a few months, and so we'll be excited to have those guests on our program. All of these are recorded and out on our YouTube channel. You can see you can get there using that QR code or youtube.com/Plantin-App. But we encourage you to go there, subscribe, set the alerts so that you know when we post new content. Today, we will I'll be giving a few roadmap updates and telling you some stories from the trenches of support, and then we'll turn it over to Bogdan to do our hands-on low-code development. Please engage with us. You can chat with us or do the Q&A, raise your hand. And at the end of the event, when it's over, the link that you've gotten in our invitation has a link to the feedback form. Tell us what we could do better or what you'd like to see next time. So running through roadmap updates, we are currently in a pre-release status. Our plan is to go into beta test on December 12th through the 16th and to release on December 19th. The release date, it could slip a day or two, but we'll update you more about that as we go on. The things that we're working on are to continue our ease of use as we update the automation experience, the automation administrative screen experience. We are adding validations to actions. That's something we're focusing on in automation, but then it will roll out to the entire product. We are improving version control. That version control came out in our last release, and here in this release, we'll be improving upon that. We will also be doing as I mentioned, we've been working on automation, and we are now working on APIs and improving the API screen to have the same kinds of drag and drop and UI improvements to make your developer experience better. We are also working in the area of add-ons and making sure that you have an easy way to update those. And for those with the appropriate license, the ability to do multi-portal licensing, and that's one that I think people have been waiting for from our community. And then continuing to update and add to the documentation. That's an ongoing process. So those are the kinds of things that you can look forward to in this next release. So from the trenches of support, we have previously released 9 hotfixes to version 1.23, and there's 2 new ones this week. The first is an enhancement, and it's a little bit on the cosmetic side, but when you encountered an error in the app builder, sometimes a red error would appear in the bottom of the screen in kind of a stacked up, jumbled up, hard to use window. And so now we've expanded that, and it shows in a nice HTML way. So when these errors occur, at least you'll be able to read them and perhaps know how to proceed. The second one was a bug fix. Within our form builder, there's a UI settings section, and you can style various components of your user interface, either by adding CSS classes or styles. And all of these support tokens. I'm going to demonstrate that in just a minute. But the styles one was for the control was not supporting tokens, and so we've corrected that. So in the demonstration section here, we'll talk a little bit about styling using tokens, and then talk a little bit too about localization paths. So styling using tokens. I have a page here that I haven't done anything with yet, except I have a form that's loaded on the page. It's a completely empty form. So we'll go ahead and manage this and add a field or two and show how we can style these. So we will add a text field, and let's say that we're going to collect the first name, and then we'll also add a button to save this. Very simple example, but let's see how this looks. So we've got that on the form, we refresh, and so we see first name and submit. Notice that it comes in the default styling of the page. So for example, the colors are black and the font is what it is. If we wanted to make this dynamic, well, excuse me, let's say if we wanted to color the letters red, we could use the UI section to do that. So we could say, for example, color red. Maybe for the label, we could say that we're going to do color blue. And this is CSS that we're putting in here directly. And so this is a static way to do it. So if we now refresh the form, we see that the first name comes in, the label comes in blue, and the text comes in red. So the styling is, we've demonstrated the styling works, but now we'll say we want to do this in a dynamic way. So one way to do that would be to say, instead of saying color blue, we could use a token, and I'm going to use the get token. And this will allow us to provide it by way of the query string. And I'm going to use the same one for both the label and the control. But we can now pass a color value in and let it be evaluated. So we refresh the form, and it goes to the default because we're not providing any color. But if we go in here and say color equals green, because that is now going to get substituted into the style, the color shows up as green. We can pick red to make it be very obvious that it's working. So it just gives you a great deal of control. Anything that you can style by way of CSS, you can place in and replace dynamically. So that gives you the ability, for example, to call attention to particular fields that dynamically need to be different. So that is styling. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is we had a support issue about localization, and it's a little bit confusing if you weren't familiar with it, didn't know. You could spend too much time trying to research this, so I want to make sure that you have the information that you need. So first of all, the style localization gives the ability that depending on the language, or you can style based on language, you can style and change your content as you want. So notice on this one, for example, we have a signature, and the clear signature label is our default clear signature. And when you click submit, it says, please wait. So these values come from localization. And if we pick if we have multiple languages enabled and we switch to a different language, we can see localization will give a different clear signature value. So, and then if we hit submit, we can have a different please wait message. I've I haven't done a good one, but just to demonstrate that localization works. So the path to do that is a little bit dependent on the template. If you look at settings for your form, you can choose Bootstrap 5, Bootstrap 3 obsolete, material. You can also have custom templates that you might have developed. But most people use Bootstrap 3 or Bootstrap 5, and the nature of the support ticket that brought this up is that the paths are different. So if you are using a Bootstrap 5 template, this is the path, and I'll show you how to get to that. If you're using Bootstrap 3, it's a different path. Another outcome of this then is that if you've done localization for Bootstrap 3 and you switch to Bootstrap 5, you'll also need to redo your localizations. Okay, so what is this localization thing? Inside site settings, you have languages, and if we look at the, you can pick I've got multiple languages activated. I'm going to look at the translation button, and there is a set of paths. For Bootstrap 5, it's local resources, desktop modules, MVC, DNN Sharp, action form, app local resources. Now, by the way, I'm going to paste these paths here in a minute on the clipboard, but so that you'll have them. But once you click the right paths, you can look for the please wait. For example, the button please wait has been modified in this language to be please wait, and then some BS5 notation for me. But it lets you customize that. So this is the place to do it for Bootstrap 5, and then this is the place to do it for Bootstrap 3. Just a note, if you do change localizations, you may have to go to, and you're trying to test it, you have to go to servers and click clear cache in order to see those changes. Otherwise, it looks like it didn't change. But anyway, that's localization, and it's a neat feature, especially if you're running multiple languages, but also if you just want to customize what a button or something says. You can peruse through that list of things in the localization area to see what can be localized or customized for you. So with that, let's move on here a little bit. We invite you to engage in the low-code Campfire. That's another event that we do, the second of our events that we do every week. This will be, this happens at the same hour on Fridays, and it's a meeting format, not a webinar format. So it's very interactive, and the people that attend engage quite a bit. We often see questions answered and problems introduced that we get some ideas on. So if you just want to learn more about the product, or if you have a particular issue you want to resolve, it's a great place to do that. A programming note that December 21st is our, I think it's third annual end of year episode. So we'll be doing our year in review. We'll doing some sneak peeks and talking about our product roadmap and more. There's always a surprise or two in the year-end episode, so we encourage you to put that on your schedule. The links for this episode I am going to paste right now onto the chat. So that includes those paths that I was talking about a little while ago. Very good. With that, we will switch on to hands-on low coding with Bogdan and talk about extending the platform using connectors.
Hello everyone. Yes, today we have a pro code topic, getting our hands dirty. I always like to go back to coding, even though it's not my job anymore. First of all, I would like to maybe go on a bit of explanation on what connectors actually are, how they work behind the scenes. And then today we'll get to implement our new connector together with a new action to to do something simple like executing a SQL query against a different database. Of course, you might say, oh, that's already been done, but I think that's the purpose why I chose this example. So it's simple to relate on how using connector is different than the other way. Good. So I'm sure most of you already use connectors, so they live in the app builder in the screen. Various add-ons will add different connectors here. So for example, one that we added a couple of releases ago, the SMTP credential, where you can configure a connection to an SMTP server. What you do with these connectors, you then use them inside actions. So for example, in a workflow, looking again at the send email action, you get this credential section here, where you can, if you have multiple, you can choose which connector this specific action should use. A bit of under the hood. So I'll bring SQL Server with the application configuration tables to show you a bit where credential live in the database and how they are different. So there are a couple of credentials store tables. There are 4 of them. So let's look at them. Maybe let's start with type. So type basically tells us which types of credentials are supported. So for example, the SMTP, you can see it here. Then we have the actual credentials. So if we look at them, the credential, you'll see, for example, the SMTP one, it has a Go ID, an ID, and then some metadata about its creation. The actual properties of the connector live in the credential stored data. So you'll see here all the properties that we were seeing on the UI. So username, password, things like that. In this case, it's null because this is basically the built-in connector for SMTP that's provided. But we look today as we create connectors, how they store data differently here. Because the major difference is that this credential store is secure. So data stored in it, it's stored encrypted. Good. So let's begin. So we'll create an SQL action, and by the way, I'll create everything from scratch, so then it's easy to follow the footsteps. I use the same principle for implementing other kind of actions and connectors. Good. So what I have here, it's a blank start from scratch kind of Visual Studio. So we are going to start with a class library .NET framework. And here we just created, I have some names here saved, so we'll just call it a sample application. I will use this location, and that's it. Let's create it. Just a second, went to my other screen. Okay, good. So the first thing that we want to do is let's create the SQL action. So just as a quick reminder, to create an action is just about implementing an interface, but of course we need a reference to the DLL that contains all the interface definition. And this is DNN sharp common, and you'll find it in the bin folder of your application. So just by linking this, now I can start creating a class. Let's call it a sample SQL action, and we have to implement action implementation. Why is not bringing it? Let's see. Even shortcut one. Okay, now it brings. Good, so that's all we have to do, and then we implement the interface. Of course, we get the 2 methods that we need to implement. Initialization, usually if you want to do some startup initial configuration, processing, stuff like that. Execute is the one actually being called whenever you do something like submitting a form, or an API is called, or a workflow is run, and so on. So I'm just going to copy paste some code here, pretty standard code, which says a new SQL connection, create a command, run a SQL against it, read back the content, and I will explain the next bit, next pieces in a bit. But before going too deep, of actions get parameters, so the ones that you can configure in the interface. So far I created the connection string, so we can define this as a parameter, and Plant and App does lots of magic behind the scenes. So if we just add a decorator here, action parameter, this will automatically be populated with us with whatever value is defined in the interface. And then we do the same for SQL query. So this action will take a connection string and we run a query against that database. Pretty simple so far. So in the execute, we are opening the connection. So this is pretty standard .NET code. What's different here is interacting with the action context, right? So whenever a set of action is run, there's a shared object that defines the context of the execution. So is this action context? If we just go to see its definition, you'll see that it has quite a few properties. It knows who is the user currently executing that piece of logic, what is the portal, if there's a page, what's the language, since Dale mentioned it earlier. The most important piece about this is the data store. So the data store are the tokens that are stored inside the context. So whenever you create, you run a SQL action to retrieve some data, of course you want to store it in tokens so you can use it in further actions. So here, just a very simple implementation. What I'm doing, I'm looking through all the fields in the select return statement, and I'm adding them in the context. And there is a shorthand syntax, so just using bracket syntax gets them to the data store properties. So I'm just saying that token name is the name of the column, and then the value, I get the value, but I convert it to string, so I don't have surprises. So this is pretty much an action, and you'll ask, okay, now how do we get this action inside the product? So of course, if I compile this, it will produce a DLL, and we need to get this DLL in the application bin folder. Now, what I will do to not have to do it manually every time, I will add a build event, post build event here, just to copy the DLL that is produced, to copy it to the application bin folder. So now every time I build this, it will get, and we can actually check this. So this is the SQL sample app, and my application lives somewhere here in the website. So this is my root of the application, and inside the bin folder, we should, let's sort it like this. We should see this one was just copied here. But this is not enough. So right now, still, I won't be able to see the new action that I created. So if I wanted to add an action here, of course, there is no, besides the built-in ones. Well, actually, it is here because I did a test earlier, but normally it wouldn't be here because we need to get the config file in place. So the config file tells Plant and App, look, there's an action, it accepts these parameters, and it has this implementation, the one that we just wrote. And actually, I could fix this just by, if we go, and I will show you where this file needs to go. So under DNS common config, this is where the configuration file is. So if we look at actions, probably here, you'll see that many of the actions that they will have a config here. So for example, this is the email send actions, and we can take a look at it. But I was just wanted to find the one that something with sample. Okay.
It might have been cached, Bogdan.
Yeah, it might have been so. Yeah. Anyways, let's maybe I will try to bring this in Visual Code. It's on the other screen again. Sorry, the zoom bar is in the way and I cannot get to drag it.
If I move the zoom bar, maybe.
Got it. Good. So here actually I have Visual Studio Code open inside the root of my website, so I can easily see all the config files here. And you notice this is the config file for the send email action. So it has an ID, it has a title. The title is placed in a structure that actually supports localization, but we hardly do it from the config file. I mean, never do it from the config file, always from the resource files. And then type string is the magic string that will tie this configuration file to our implementation. Some metadata here, like a group, for example, specified in which group in the interface this action will appear into. And then we have a couple of parameters, and we'll come back to this example because we have here credential stores, we have text parameters, we have Boolean parameters, all types of parameters. Each of these node, of course, determines one of those fields to appear in the UI. So when I'm using this send email action here, all the UI that we are going to see, probably now it's compiling, all the UI that we are going to see, it's generated based on that file. So if the action file here says a credential, now here I see a credential. If it says from, like it's a text box, here I see a text box. So how do we get this UI to generate? We have to create our own config file. So going back to the solution, to make it simple, I will replicate the config folder structure. So I will create a config folder, and underneath I will create a new folder called actions. So now I'm just mirroring this structure, config actions, because then if I create credential type, I create it in the same folder and I copy the whole folder to the application with one command. Good. And also, since I'm going to do that and I don't like doing things manually, I have prepared another line here that basically this one just copies the entire config folder to the application common config folder. So every time I build, the config files will go automatically there. Good. So now, getting back here, maybe let me do some cleanup to rename this class properly. Okay, so now I have a class, I have a config file, and the moment I build this, it all gets copied in the right folders, and we can check that right away. But let me refresh the screen so it has time to build while we look at the folder that everything got in the right place. So looking at this, I do see the SQL sample action here. Oh, we didn't build it actually. It's not there yet. This was one from earlier. Yeah, so I'll get rid of this. Good. That was the problem earlier because we haven't actually created it yet. So let's create a config file. So we can name it however we want. I will maybe use the name of the project, maybe actions. I will have a couple more, and you'll understand in a second. And here the extension that we use is that JSON.config. .config. So if you look here, you see all the files have should have. Oh, they have that. Oh no, okay. Is this Windows Explorer? Yeah, so it's .json.config. It puts it separate. So yeah, be very careful with this naming convention. it happened to me to just put JSON and spend a lot of time chasing ghosts. So JSON.config.
So our UI builder looks for .json.config, and if it finds it, then it's going to get built into the UI automatically.
Sure. Yes, because historically we also had XML files. We gave up in the meantime, but that's why this naming convention arrived. Okay, we try to do it as C#, but I will say just open with and use the JSON editor instead. Good. So to save a bit of time, I already have the config done. And right now, I will explain it. So it has the an ID. This needs to be uniquely between all the actions installed in the system. Otherwise, there will be conflicts. The last one loaded will override the other ones, which could be also a nice trick if you want to override some of our built-in actions. You know, use the same ID, and you'll provide a new behavior for it. Just a nice title, and then this is the magic string that connects this config file to my class. So this is the class that I just created. And then settings group. This says that my action will appear here when I click in the code group. So it will be here at the bottom probably. It's alphabetical. And then the parameters. So to start with, I will move to the connection to the credential store in a bit. But to start with, I'm just having a string as a connector. So it's a text. It just says connection string, and I have the SQL query as a code mirror, so a large text where I write the query. This, by the way, I copied from our SQL Action. So now I have a config file, and now if I build, now I have the config file also copied. I'll refresh this, and now if we look at the actions, we see the SQL sample action JSON.config just got copied over. Good. So as soon as this recompiles, we'll get the chance to see the new action in place. Until this does, maybe I'll move on, and then I'll come back to check the action. Oh, actually, it's already loaded. Good. So now our action code, and here we have the sample execute SQL. I'm open its settings, and now we see the two settings: the connection string and the SQL query. Now I can select all from let's say users, not all. Let's say just select username, so we test with a single token. I will leave the connection empty for now. I will take this save just to make sure I output it. So we just reflect this token out. We don't do anything else with it at this stage. Let's see. Let's see what it does until now. I'm running this. Okay, so we haven't initialized the connection string. That's why. So it doesn't work with it empty because that's how I implemented it here. Here, yeah. So it's just that is an empty string here, and of course it will fail. I could spend the time to default to the built-in database, but the purpose of this meeting is actually to get it to connect to external databases. And I already prepared the connection string to a new database that I created. So just to show it to you, I have here a new database called test. I have an orders table. It has, let's see, I think I had it open somewhere. Never mind. Let's do it again. So I have here a table of orders, very simple, just for demo purposes. It has these fields, and I already configured it with a test user that has access to it. And this test user, let's go back to the process to put it here. This test user has, of course, a strong password, and then here maybe we need to, let's say, select customer from orders because we don't have a users table in the new database. Okay, let me also change it here real quick and let's test it again. So you see, I got the first row, which is the first customer. I got the first row from the database.
Perfect. Bogdan, before you go on, I'll just point out there is a question on there. I'm not sure I understand the question, but it's on the question and answer. Are all parameters are automatically replace tokens?
I'm not sure. I think the default is yes, but there is a parameter, so you can explicitly say that token should be replacing this or it shouldn't be replacing this. So this action parameter actually has a couple of properties of its own. You can say it's required. You can put a require message. So you have a bit of control over how it injects the content into the variable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. So let's see. We are here. So just for comparison, this is not very different. I mean, it's a simpler version of SQL of the SQL action we already have, which has the connection string, the SQL query, but also has other parameters. So we created a simplified version of it. And the problem with it, of course, is now I have this connection string here in clear text. I have a strong password, but everybody that has access to this screen can see my strong password. I could move this into a token, but that doesn't change much because still anyone could use the token to see the password. Even if you have let's say a security hole in the UI and somehow accidentally people can submit text with tokens, they could see it. So that's why we created the credential store, to create like a secure repository to store these kind of things, but also with a bigger vision, because we don't want to stop to just have the data store locally. The plan is that we'll start integrating the key management services. So for example, AWS has a key management store. So then you start storing this credential outside of the system in secure enterprise grade systems. So let's see, how do we get this from being a string to being a connector? So, of course, we need a new config file. So just to look at the config folder, you can see here that we have a folder called credential types, and I will use the same name for my folder. And here you'll see that we have for each type of credential type, there is a file. So if we go to Visual Studio Code, this is very similar to how we configure actions. So it has an ID, a title, and then the parameters that it asks for. So this the UI that you saw in the connectors is actually again generated from this config file. You don't need to write any UI for it. So what this means, it means here we have we need to add a new folder, just so my copy folder works. And here we need a new entry for the database connection. So I will add a new item, and I will call it maybe. Let's see what's the standard here to use the same standard. So it's just the name of the credential. So just maybe I'll call it database. Again, .json.config. Okay. Visual Studio does this sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So it's we're creating a database connector that's going to be consumed in your SQL query, but it could be consumed in other types of queries or other types of actions.
Yep. Let me open it again because it just crashed on me. No, this one. Okay. It happens to Microsoft too, not just to Planter. Good. Let's see. I did lose my changes here. Let's see if they're on the disk. Show all files. Yeah, they are here, including project. Okay, so let's see. I will actually have to open as JSON. Good. So again, I already created the config file, so we don't have spend time typing a lot here now. So what I did here, I gave it an ID, needs to be unique, gave it a nice title, and then the parameters, it will require a connection string. And pretty much this is the single parameter. I made it text, and I will show you how we will secure it a bit later after we do the initial implementation, a help text. And here we have a test function, you know, so whenever you go into the connectors, you have a test button here, you know, so if I test this, it will tell me if it's true or false. I think here I didn't configure something in my user, and that's why it failed. So we have a test button. By default here, I have a always successful, you know, so it always say, yeah, connection is successful regardless of, but we'll get to implement our own tester as well. No. Good. So again, and to avoid a restart, maybe let's see if I can just copy this here. No, it doesn't work. Never mind. I will do it the hard way. Good. So now you see it says 2 files copied because it just copied this. Let's refresh the connectors to see it in action. And actually, until this is refreshed, maybe we can buy some time and look also at how we can implement this kind of tester. So luckily, this is also an action. You know, so we just need to implement a new action that returns a certain response based on either it's a good test, the test runs successfully or not. So maybe speed up the process, just copy paste this. SQL sample action test. Database test. Okay, I'm just going to actually, I think, let me bring it. I already have it. I will not show you again how to do an action from scratch because we already did it. So here, I created a DB connection test, and it implements again actually it's a different interface. It's iTest action interface. So it's not exactly an action. It's iTest action interface, which derives from the action. No, so it's still an action, but it has a bit more flavor because it has these credentials. So here again, using action parameters, I have a parameter that now is not a basic type like we had the string, connection string. Now it's of type action credential. So this is one of our objects, and this will get automatically populated with the credential. In the execute method of the action, what we do, the magic thing here, the difference here, instead of having a connection string, I'm using an API to get the value, in this case, the connection string, to get it from the credential store. You know, so this is the only difference, and we'll have to do these changes to the other actions of action as well. Connection open and return success. If there's an exception, we'll catch it here and we'll return false. You know, so pretty simple. Of course, we need to transport this into the type here. You know, so the assembly name is this. The namespace is the same. And the class name is this. Okay. Before I compile this, let's do a quick check here to see if our new connectors is here. So the database connectors is here, my database. And here we can copy paste the connection string, which was this one. Right? So now we have here a connection string. Save, I can test.
Yeah, you haven't compiled yet.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's compile it.
And I know you didn't compile it. I'm just trying to act like I know what you're doing.
I didn't compile it. The
You
first.
did- I'm sorry, original. You did now, but a minute ago when you were trying to run it, and it hadn't copied in yet.
Good. Okay, so until this loads again, let me explain you this thing here. So secure, basically, if you make it true, in some circumstances, we do inject the credential in the context. So especially, for example, in the automation in triggers, whenever a trigger fires that uses a connector, it injects the parameters into the context, unless secure is true. So I would advise always use it true unless you really need something available from the connection string. And also this one, I would put to password because what happens here, now if I edit this, of course, I can still see the connection string here, right? So let's see if test works. Test connector. Can I use the action that test is connected? Okay, we'll look into it a bit more. Maybe we figure it out. Good. So I will make it like this. Let's take a look here. So what did I do wrong here? SQL sample app, database connection test, SQL sample app. And oh, of course, I didn't create an action for a configuration for it, right? So I could create a new config file, but you'll notice that config files, we always do them an array. So basically, it's possible to do multiple config actions in the same file, to group them together. So what we need here, and I already have the JSON for it. I created a connectors database test ID. This is the class implementing it. So we have to change this. We have to change this exactly to this string. Okay. So this is the class that implements the test. This is the title. This is the group. It has this parameter, and it's of type DB. So again, this is a magic string that says it has to match with this one, because this tells which action tests which connector. Good. So I think only now, let's compile it and refresh again. Only now we'll have the complete setup. Let's see. Let's wait for it.
So great time to ask any questions if you have any along the way.
Good. So let's edit this. So now you see this change to a password. So I save it, I reload it, I save it. It's always I never get it on the front end. So the backend always returns these stars. Of course, if I type something, I will break it. But let's see if I can get it to work. Yeah, so it says connection successful because it was working. If I type anything in here and save it, of course, now it fails. The connection string fails. So the only way to get it back now is to copy paste the original connection string again. And this time you'll not see my password. Save, test. Now we have a successful connector.
We may be having internet issues. Patrick, are you still with me?
I am.
Okay, looks like Bogdan may have frozen here. We'll wait a minute for him to come back. Yep. He has a blue screen and we'll be right back. That'll take a minute to do that. And for those of you watching in replay, you missed the whole thing because we'll edit this out. So again, anyone with questions, it'd be a great time to get them on the list. And if we don't get Bogdan back, we may continue this in our next episode. We'll see about that. But either way, we'll make sure that there's a good and complete presentation of how to do this. I almost know how to do some of the things that Bogdan is showing today. I almost follow along, and it reminds me why I'm not a core developer, why I'm a low-code developer. Patrick, have you ever gotten down into that level of the product?
No, yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, but I am much better at the low code developing.
I've worked with other pro coders, and they look at this stuff and it's oh yeah, that's exactly how I would have designed it if I'd had a chance to design it. It's easy, and again, it's a little bit over my head, but that's why we have pro coders, and my hat's off to them. Yeah. Mark, I agree. I'm glad that we're doing the coding, and it makes me feel bad that I push the developers so hard sometimes with, yeah, just get that done. It's easy. It shouldn't take 15 minutes. So there's a question from Jim about currently third-party API credentials are stored in a token. Would connectors being more secure? Yeah, I think that's the objective, and I really think that's where Bogdan wanted to go if he has the time, either and probably till next time. But the idea of creating them as a and you're coming back, creating them as a connector, and then being able to consume them as a token or reveal them as a token, yes, would be more secure. I think that's the direction he's going. And then thanks, Ben, for giving me a hard time. We'll take that up on Friday. Welcome back, Bogdan. We've been chatting about you and how bright the development team is, and how glad we're low coders instead of pro coders.
Good. Apologies about that.
My fear is always that my internet is going to go out in the middle of this. So
yeah,
I understand blue screen. Absolutely.
Yes. The odd part is that I have a Surface Pro, which is also Microsoft hardware. Okay, good. So getting back to it, we already see it working. I think the only thing left to do to wrap this session up is in our SQL action, we no longer need to hard code the connection string. We need to bring the connector instead. And here, where we use the connection string and the SQL query, we need to get them from the actually, no, the SQL query is fine. Just the connection string, we need to bring it from the credential store. So to do that, actually, we already have the code. We just grab it from here. And we replace this with this. So this will auto-populate this with a credential object. And here, instead of using the connection string variable, we use this API to get it from the credential store. Connection string. And that's it. Now, let's see if this is back. I will have to compile anyway, so it doesn't matter. Good. So now, as soon as the screen will load, we'll be able to use the drop down to select a credential in the new SQL action instead of hard coding the connection string there.
And when that comes back, there was a question from Jim about he's storing third-party API credentials in a token, and would doing it in connectors be more secure? Which I think that's where you ultimately were going, right? Doing them as tokens. And I think
Did we lose Bogdan again?
I think he crashed his system.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. And that is the case. So I think what we'll do is, for those of you who want to hang on and see the very end of this, we'll hold on and do that so that it is all in one recording. But all you have to do is just imagine that this worked perfectly, and that now the SQL action had a connector that he could select, and the whole process from front to back is secure. And so, yeah, it wasn't your fault, Jim. But when you see this in replay, it will have the perfect solution at the end. So please do that. And for those of you who I see we have a few new faces today, thank you for attending the Low Code Cafe. And by all means, feel free to hang around. It's going to take Bogdan a couple of minutes to reboot, and we'll show this off.
So
while you were gone, I gave people permission to escape if they wanted to, and just imagine a perfect ending.
Sure. Yeah, I was always almost there. So, like
no, let's do it, because we'll just add it on to the end of the recording and edit some of this out so that it looks perfect.
And maybe I will stop my video, maybe to minimize the risk.
Good.
Again. Okay, so now we're just waiting for things to load, and we should be able to use the new action. Yes, I think maybe until this unfreezes, you mentioned there were some questions, Dave.
Yeah, Jim was asking about whether third party. I think he's saying that third-party APIs, he's storing the credentials in tokens, and would doing it by connectors be more secure. I think that's the direction you were going.
Yes. So like we did it for the SMTP connectors, so now SMTP uses a credential. We plan to do the same for the server request action. So at least the common ways of passing API keys into various third-party APIs, we cover them through built-in connectors. Of course, if there's a very custom API that wants it in a different format, like maybe doesn't want it in the authorization header or the common ways, then yeah, it will still be up to writing a custom connector or to do it via tokens.
But you could store you could implement a token that brought the connection string from the store. It still potentially opens up the hole, but at least it wouldn't be there in clear text. Right?
Yeah, you could, but more likely we'll have to provide a token, because remember I mentioned in the beginning that inside the database, the credentials are encrypted, so there is no way to get it with a simple query. You have to know the encryption mechanism. Good. Come on. Were there any questions? Any other questions?
Not so far. A lot of people anxiously hanging around to see this thing really work.
See it working, huh? Now it's compiling the front-end applications. So that can take a while as well.
So I see we're running our new version, 124.
Yeah.
There is now a question about whether can I create an action that wrap and extend a core action?
Sure, you could. Most of our actions, they live in a DNS common actions assembly. So if you link to that, you'll have access to all the actions, and you can easily wrap them up. Maybe you can instantiate it because you saw they are very easy to instantiate. They don't depend on lots of stuff, and you could call the execute method directly. So if from your execute method, you just pass Visual Studio Manage to Open. So from your execute method, you instantiate a new type of this class, and you call that execute method. I think actually this might need an API to wrap this, to populate these parameters, because of course, if you just do new on it, it will not instantiate. You need to call an API. But yeah, if you're interested, of course, we can show you how to do it.
Very good. And that's the nice part about, I think, about this platform. When the question comes, can it be extended in this particular way? The answer is yes, we've already thought about that, or yes, that's possible because of the way it's architected.
Okay, so it's nearly back. Maybe until it's back. I will show you how the data is stored, because this was something that I want to highlight in the beginning. So again, looking for the credential tables to look at the entries. So let's find the credential store. I think I went past it. Yeah, this is the credential store. So if we look now at the data table where all the properties of credential are stored, we'll get to see that actually this is the connection string, and you see in the database it's stored securely. No? So there is no way for somebody to just having access to the database to decrypt this string here. You need to know the decryption algorithm, which only lives in code.
So I had a question about in that database on the credential store. There's a unique ID associated with that. If somebody develops their own credential, excuse me, not the entry ID, but the ID that's in credential store.
Yeah. So this is basically the ID that I provided in the. Sorry, is this the one? No, the credential types. So this in the credential types, so I created a DB, and it got the ID 9. But this is the exact same thing that gets populated from here. Is this ID? So yeah, when you create your own ID, it will automatically pop in here. Okay,
so on different systems, it might be implemented with a different number, but the ID is what's unique.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So let's see. Maybe let's do it like this. Yep. Good. So now let's edit this workflow here. And now instead of, okay, one last step we needed to do is actually also change the parameter in the config file. So I have this credential parameter in the tester function, in the tester action, and here I had the connection string which was of type text. I need to replace this with the credential. Again, we can build this. But again, waiting times, compilation times. There is another table in here that I haven't spoken with, which is groups. And actually, you'll see that credentials, they are not tied directly to a type. So this is the credential, this is my credential, is tied to a group ID. And the group ID is tied to the type. So the group ID has a type ID. So 9 was the connector type. This I haven't spoken about this because this is something that we are likely to remove. This was to create dynamic groups of connectors where maybe you had 10 let's say SMTP connectors and you want to switch between them based on some dynamic criteria. But with our expression builder, it's much easier and less complex to achieve the same. So that's why I haven't touched on those. Okay, so getting back here, this is our sample action. Now instead of the connection string, I should have had the credential. Why? Oh, okay. It took a while to load it. Maybe let me refresh the screen. Yeah. So now it's here. Connector my database. So now if I run and test, this runs successfully, and this time it ran through the credential store without using directly a string property for the connection string. So finally, this wraps the session today. It was a bit of a rough ending.
It's going to look perfect in replay, Bogdan, so don't worry about that. So with that, I think I will bring us to our closing slide. Thank you for putting on the demonstration. And again, I think it's going to be a very valuable interest to our pro coders and give a new appreciation from our low coders as to this isn't for the faint of heart. With that, thank you. And we will see you next time or join us on Friday. Thanks, everyone.